are so lucky today. We have the fabulous Corey Keyes. He is not just a wonderful human. I've got to know him a bit while we've been discussing this webinar, but he is a very distinguished American sociologist and psychologist, pioneering in the work of positive psychology and mental health. He's also a professor of sociology at Emory, I think I'm pronouncing that right, Corey, Emory University in Atlanta, and focuses on mental health research and education. He is also a colleague and a very, very respected friend of the guys that run Be Well Co. So that would be Dr. Joop Van Argerten and Dr. Matt Iciello. We also have been in contact about his work with the mental health continuum, and in that same vein have a very similar view where we challenge traditional views in mental health, the spectrum of which includes languishing, which is the topic of the webinar today, moderate mental health, and flourishing. And perhaps one of the most interesting things that kind of made me reframe our view of mental health is that it shouldn't just be defined by the absence of mental illness, that there needs to be a different definition, and it needs to include the presence of positive emotions and engagement and purpose. So, Corey, we're really, really, really happy to have you, and thank you for taking the time today or tonight. What time is it there?
It's 7 o'clock in the evening. It's Thursday evening.
Right. So it's not.
I'm so happy to join your Friday morning.
Well, why don't you I've introduced you, but just talk a little bit about your work and kind of where the inspiration came from and how you've been approaching it, and I suppose provoking different conversations around the mental health space.
Sure. Well, I don't want to get too much of a historical background. We could get stuck back in the past, but suffice it to say that I think what I've been motivated by is trying to take things that have been considered unimportant by the generation that came before me. And then when we young ones start out, we are facing a generation that has defined for us what's important and gets resources and attention.
Yep.
And they've defined for us what is unimportant and should remain invisible. And I was shocked, to tell you the truth, when I started out my career in higher education and started studying mental health. Nobody was paying attention to mental health, at least what I naively assumed was mental health, that there was the presence of something good.
Yeah.
And it was very clear to me at that point in time that I had inherited a world just like everyone else where mental health was merely the absence. It was an empty category. By the way, I've been reading recently that something I did not know, that the number 0 was the last number brought into the lexicon of man, because it too was considered an empty category that was unimportant.
Wow.
And considered a little bit suspiciously, and without introducing the number 0 to math, we would not have gone beyond mere counting.
That's
algebra and trigonometry.
It wouldn't exist.
No.
No.
And here's languishing is sort of like that category, much like the number 0, where it's been invisible in an empty category.
Yeah.
So I've been trying to make things that are considered invisible more visible, because I know languishing and I know what invisibility feels like.
I think this is the thing that's really interesting. When Adam Grant, I think, said, or you said, that it's kind of the neglected middle child in mental health. You sort of got mental illness at one end and you've got flourishing at the other, but there's a whole lot of stuff going on in between that we don't really deal with. We obviously have a report that everyone can download and have a look at on languishing. First one that was done in Australia, which was very much inspired by your work. And, it was kind of shocking to us to find that 1 in 5 Australians are feeling like they have no sense of purpose, meaning. They're feeling stuck, stagnant, like they're kind of going through the motions. They're also finding it increasingly harder to connect within their communities, connect with, loved ones. So there's a certain amount of isolation and withdrawal. And I went out and filmed some people who, put their hand up and said, I've been like that. I have felt like that. And it was awful. And I've asked them to describe it so we could actually show the feeling of it and name it. Because once you name it, then maybe we can start to corral behind it as opposed to just ignoring the silent, suffering elephant in the room. So I feel like this is something that is really important. And it would be really interesting to hear your view on this group and why this is so important, not just for people in their lives, but in workplaces as well. Because essentially, you know, if you've got 20% of your workforce that are pretty much checked out and really not able to do deep work, that is a problem.
Well, languishing is definitely been about the middle child. It shouldn't be considered just sort of this middle child in the sense that it's sort of like, well, yeah, it's just one of several problems. One way to think of languishing is it's a gateway. It is a gateway, and it increases the risk for things like mental illness. Now, I've been saying that for years, and others have been, and there's lots of evidence to make that case. It doesn't just include the risk for depression and anxiety. Research during the pandemic showed that in frontline healthcare workers, languishing, the more severe it was, the more likely frontline healthcare workers were to develop PTSD.
Wow.
If they were flourishing, whether it was in healthcare or the clergy, the study after study showed they were protected against mental illnesses, not just PTSD, but depression and anxiety. So one way to think of languishing is that it is a source of prevention, but I really want us to move beyond that argument.
Yeah, because that
I don't think people sort of glaze over when you say, well, we're out to try to prevent mental illnesses. Well, what we're also out to try to deal with is that languishing isn't just a temporary mood. It wasn't just a mood just because the pandemic came along.
Yeah.
It's been around for hundreds of years, and I document that in my book. Long before it was even a public health problem, it was considered the eighth deadly sin before the 12th century. It has been around for a very long time, and it has caused enormous suffering, and it is a problem in and of itself. And people who want to promote mental health need to understand that is our cause.
Yeah,
we need to address languishing.
We do.
Not just because it prevents mental illness, but because it causes suicide and premature mortality and lost productivity and a bunch of other problems in and of itself.
Well, I think I'm getting notes from people. I need you to speak more into the microphone, apparently.
Oh, I got it almost.
Oh, there we go. That should be good. I think I know. You're wonderful. Wonderful. And there's pearls of wisdom. I think this is the biggest thing is, you know, unless we're sort of in this culture that, and we've got the same thing here, unless it's acute, unless it's really distress, unless we sort of just don't think about it. And also maybe because we're kind of drawn to stuff that is that acute. But one of the things that both Joop and Matt have said is this is not a problem down the track. This is right now. This is something we have to address now. And it's not, the word prevention has always been sort of complicated, hasn't it? Because people go, oh, well, you know, it's not happening now, so there are other priorities. But it is happening now. And it is something that we discovered in the report as well. And it's happening right across the board. It doesn't seem to discriminate between age, sex, circumstances. You know, it had a huge impact on certain cohorts like 18 to 24 and the mental health curve that, you know, usually goes, you know, happy, not so great, and then get happy again. That kind of completely leveled out in our research with that younger cohort who are feeling very much like they're disconnected and they're really struggling to find purpose. And that is real, and disconnected from their own communities, and that they don't necessarily feel like society is a very good place. So this sort of stuff is happening right now. What do you think the impacts of those feelings are, you know, from a community and societal point of view, and certainly in a workplace as well.
Where to start? Because there's quite an enormous literature out there showing the impacts. While I was writing the book, a study came in from Hungary, and it was focused on teens. And it looked at depression, but it also measured mental health using my mental health continuum. And they were interested in non-suicidal self-harm in teenagers.
Wow.
Typically, it's higher in teens that are depressed compared to those who are not. But of course, as I mentioned, they included my mental health continuum. What they found was teenagers who were languishing were just as likely, if not more likely, to engage in self-harm, cutting, pulling hair, pinching, I mean, all kinds of self-harm. The way I describe it in my book is that it is very painful when you're languishing because for most people, they feel numb or emotionless. They don't feel much of anything.
Yeah.
And what non-suicidal self-harm is getting at is I'd rather feel pain in the sense that I'm still alive than not feel anything.
Well, I think
I was struck by that study in and of itself. It was so remarkable. Now, I could go on and talk about the suicidality. It's not just depression that's increasing risk for suicidality in our teenagers.
Yeah.
Level of languishing is compounding it. And even when teenagers are free of depression, those who are languishing, depending on their severity, as it becomes more severe, the more suicidal they become.
Yeah. Well, I think we've still got problems with sound, Corey, so I don't know what we do. How can we?
I'll just jump in and just check whether the sound, the audio that's selected on your Zoom, Corey, might be coming from your laptop rather than from your headphones. So if you click on that audio button there and it...
Let's try this.
Oh, that's better already.
Oh, good.
Oh, my.
For reasons, and I want to apologize to the audience, it switched on its own. I had nothing to do with clicking the audio from my microphone.
No. You are talking to a woman who is literally is called user error. That is what I get every time I walk in. I am.
All right.
Anyway, look, I think this is great because you should see what's going on. Fabulous. Woohoo. Yay. This is perfect.
Okay.
Everyone's saying they can hear. Okay. So the work that you've just done recently that we've been talking about, tell us a little bit about the study that you've done about, or if you can, I mean, I'm presuming it's published and we can talk about it, languishing at work.
Well, yes, it's not published in a scientific journal. We're working on the articles right now, but it's all out in a formal report. I'm working with the director of a center in the School of Business at the University of Illinois, and he and I want to create an ongoing national report card around mental health at work and at home. And yes, and what we've done is take my 14 questions and contextualize them, answer the 14 questions while you're at work. So let's give you an example to the audience. One question is, do the things you get to do on a daily basis contribute to anything of worth and value to you? And so we ask that question, but while you're at work, do you feel that the things you get to do contribute anything of worth and value to your workplace? Then we ask the 14 questions of the same people. Now answer the same questions when you're away from work, at home, living life, if you will. And what was remarkable is I had a hunch, but we now have data to say mental health is deeply contextual. You don't carry one form of mental health everywhere you go. So to give the audience an example, 25% of our sample met the criteria for flourishing while they're at home, but they were languishing while they were at work. And only 9% were flourishing while they were at work, but languishing while they're at home.
And the problem with that is?
Well, the problem at that is what we're starting to look at the data, and you do get some spillover effects. But when you're languishing at work, it has deeply contextual effects right? So a lot of bad things happen at work, not the least of which is intentions to quit your job. You spend part of your day looking at job ads. You're halfway out the door.
Right.
Your mind isn't at work. It's on other things. There's all kinds of lost productivity and presenteeism, the typical things. You get the biggest bang for your buck right now, given what we've looked at, is when you can have workers who not only flourish at work, but are able to also flourish at home.
Yeah. Well, one of the things that, I mean, I'm not sure whether the wonderful Liv, who makes all of these webinars possible, is she ready? We wanted to throw some of these questions. Yes, we will absolutely share them and the report that we've done at Be Wellco. But I think it'd be interesting just to have a little poll. So please feel free to have a think about these questions yourselves. So the first one, at home, how often do you feel, one, that you have warm, trusting relationships with people, either in your immediate family or in your community? So if people can vote, that would be wonderful. And question number 2, at home, how often do you feel that you have experiences with family or community that challenge you to grow, support you to grow, to become a better person? I'm not allowed to vote, and neither are you, Corey. Okay, so let's have a look. Liv will work this magic. I think one of the things that's really interesting for me is when you say contextual, it also must be around, where you're at in different stages of life. I mean, I remember, first time mum, going from, work to home with a baby, feeling completely overwhelmed and out of my depth. Just, completely changed life, and it certainly felt very tough. I knew I wasn't postnatally depressed, but I wasn't great either. And I felt like I couldn't talk about it because I was meant to be feeling this amazing joy, this bundle of joy, but I was terrified and overwhelmed and exhausted. And I know a lot of mums like me who've gone on to have other kids as well. It's, the terrain, but it's still tough to find meaning for yourself and time for yourself and all that sort of stuff. And many of us were prescribed antidepressants, for example. And one of the things I said to a girlfriend recently was, remember when you took all those antidepressants? The problem was we didn't feel bad. We just didn't feel anything. And I can't imagine living in that numb state because there's no capacity for joy. There's no capacity for feeling, successful or like there's opportunity. So I think that there's a lot to be said too in just how we assess, screen, discuss, and even in a work environment, how do we manage to, without shaming or without making this feel like an onerous thing, how do we encourage these conversations? Here we go. Wow. Okay. Well, the good news is that 40% feel that every day they have warm and trusting relationships in their family and home. That is wonderful.
Well,
So
and to flourish, you would have almost every day. So if you 40, 50, 69%
of people
that based on that one question,
yeah,
would be flourishing.
Technically flourishing.
At home.
Okay. Which is wonderful. At home. Now, what about the next question, Liv? Can we see that? Or is it not ready yet? Not sure. Anyway, we will discuss things as we see those results.
Well, I think what happened was when whoever put the poll together should have included the same question and asked people at work.
Well, look at that. Okay, so now we're going to do the same thing at work. This is going to be a doozy. All right, so at work, how often do you feel like you have work that challenges you to grow and become a better person? And the second question is, at work, have something important to contribute to your organization? Let's have a listen to this. I know that I remember, and I think I said this to you the other night, I remember working in a certain organization. None of us knew where it was headed. We didn't understand the vision, the values. We didn't know what we were working towards or how we were meant to contribute. We were just, expected to work very hard and be sort of desk bound. And I remember saying to the boss of the organization, what's going on? And he said, you're just not on the bus. And I said, which bus? He said, it doesn't matter. And I said, but where's the bus going? And he said, it doesn't matter, just get on it. And I remember thinking, I really don't know. In other words, the sense of purpose and direction is so important personally and professionally, isn't it?
Yes.
Yeah.
When you were talking earlier, it's remarkable to me how the mental health continuum is expanding to be used. There's scholars in Spain who are now studying postpartum languishing, which is remarkably higher
Yeah.
than
Okay.
postpartum depression. The average, based on a meta-analysis, of postpartum depression was around 17%, but it was upwards to 30 to 40% when it came to postpartum languishing. And then when you looked at the causes, the problems caused by languishing, it was just as bad, if in some cases, when it came to connecting with your infant, worse for mothers who were languishing postpartum.
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
so this is just one of several areas where the work is beginning to finally be expanded to add to an important discussion, which is, of course, there's postpartum depression.
Yeah.
But we're missing an enormous amount of problems when we're not also screening for languishing
Yeah.
postpartum. And to answer your question about work, it doesn't get better until only with age. So
Yeah.
in the typical adult lifetime of work age, between roughly 25 to 65, its languishing is highest at the beginning. It declines steadily until you're almost out the door.
Well,
Then right. So it's two things are going on there. One is that it takes a while for you to reach some level of seniority and some control at work and some contribution.
yeah.
And once you're almost out the door, you're much more likely to be flourishing.
Well, that's kind of interesting too, because the research that we did didn't necessarily show that. So that U shape, I guess. But if you look at the majority of where the biggest cohorts in the Australian workplace sit, which are kind of the millennials and the Gen Zs, they make up about 44% of the workforce in Australia. There are about 6 million of, say, 14 million. I know these are tiny numbers for you, Corey, but if we assumed that 1 in 5, so 1.6 million of the 6 are languishing at work or just languishing generally, that is a big number. That's a big number. And that's something that we certainly want to investigate more. I think there's lots of things, and I'd love to get into, what we could potentially start to do to screen for languishing and start having these conversations. The campaign that we're doing and the report was just kind of the foundation of it. So we had the data, like you said, but to explore it, we need to come up with ways to talk about it. So this is kind of interesting too. This means that there are a lot of days where you're not feeling like you've got the opportunity to grow and be
Yeah,
challenged.
personal growth is pretty
It's pretty low.
It's not happening for most people at work.
Yeah, we found that too. Okay. And then I've now learned how to operate the scroll button, user error. So then the next question, this is heartbreaking for me, because to not feel like you're able to make a contribution, or that you know what sort of contribution, or that it's being acknowledged, or there's some sort of motivation once or twice a week isn't bad. I mean, when you look at this data, what would you think?
Well, I'm hoping Be Well and others will actually use the contextualized version of the mental health continuum, because it's quite striking, the results we found here in the US, and I don't think things are any different in Australia. What I found was that 31% of American workers are languishing across the board.
That's huge.
At home and at work, 31%. Now, the good news is 35% are flourishing in both places, but come on, 35% rates of mental health at home and at work are appalling when you really think about it.
Yeah.
And then there is this huge difference, like 1/4 of the workforce, as I said, is living one kind of life at home, they're flourishing, and an entirely different life at work where they're languishing.
Yeah, okay.
And so I suspect if we get these questions into, into your population, I suspect you're going to see this too.
The same thing.
And there's some modest spillover effects. You get some benefit at work if you're flourishing at home but languishing at work, but it's not much. It's what's really important is we need to prioritize mental health as more than the absence and what I call flourishing.
Yeah. Well, looking at this, warm and trusting relationships with people you work with, this is also perhaps a clue because, if we're saying that, maybe it's sitting at 30 to 33%, if you get to say almost every day and every day, it's still pretty low, it's pretty low.
Yeah.
And to go somewhere every day where you don't feel that connection, and if you're languishing, then you're even more disconnected. I remember asking you, how do you spot someone who's struggling with languishing? And you said it's when they, kind of go really quiet. But there's also that sense of, I can't really talk about it. What are you going to do? You're going to go to your boss and say, hey, I'm really unmotivated. I don't feel like I've got any sense of direction here. I don't understand why I'm doing this work. I don't understand how I'm contributing. And, I want to have a conversation about it. I mean, that would take some true grit in a work environment, particularly, when you're worried about job security and you've got kids to support. So is it that people just sort of have this muted acceptance of a life without purpose and meaning, and they just are going through the grind? Is that, why is this happening, Corey?
Well, I'm not going to pretend to have the answer to that. I just simply can tell you that there was a study I reviewed and put in the book, and it was about 3 of the most challenging medical subspecialties. And they chose those specialties because they're really demanding. One is general surgery.
Wow.
The other is emergency medicine doctors. And then the other was OBGYN doctors.
Yeah.
And what they found was a level of stress and demands and adversity didn't matter when it came to your level of mental health, whether you're languishing or flourishing. What did was your relationships at work. If you had warm, trusting, open relationships, you've had coworkers who understand that sometimes you have a bad day, and you have coworkers who, when you do have a bad day, are there for you. But isn't it interesting? Openness, trust, and warmth, a sense that we're in this together and we're not all perfect. We got each other's back. Yeah. So what really eroded these doctors' well-being was working in a very demanding specialty without any support or connection or warmth. They can do hard. Any human being can do really hard and difficult if there's warmth, trust, and openness and support and an understanding that we're all there to get we have each other's back.
Yeah.
I find that again and again that when people are mentally healthy, when they're flourishing, they can do hard. They can do demanding.
Yeah.
It's when they're languishing and when you take away any kind of support system and you expect them to just keep doing the grind and doing hard. It simply wears people down. That's why I use the subtitle. It's life. Is eventually going to wear us all down. Don't get me wrong.
Yeah.
But most of us have unplugged long before. That's if you look at the image for my paperback now, it's this image of a brain that's unplugged from your heart.
Yeah.
We've gone offline.
Yeah.
When you're languishing, you've gone offline. And the workplace needs to understand that we need not just warmth and trust and belonging. We need to know that we're part of a team.
And a community. I mean, this is some really great commentary that's been coming through. I'm so grateful for people for jumping in. We're going to put some questions to Corey from you guys in a minute, but I do think the theme that's coming out around COVID cutting us off from relationships, particularly people who lived alone, did it super tough, working from home, the risk of isolation, and that sort of expectation to be always available, that blurring of, work and home has had a huge impact. And, I've had to really think for the first time about how do I create separateness, because if I don't, I'm always on and then I get overwhelmed and I get tired. So, a lot of stuff around boundaries and setting expectations. I also feel like, there's this sense of if I don't say, the list of things that I've done every day, is that going to be a problem? I was in a previous job where every morning I had to sit there with the boss and say, this is what I did yesterday. This is what I'm going to do today. And I tell you, everybody just, I mean, the amount of people who left that business was just horrifying, because it was just like, there's nothing to connect. This is just, it's like a Big Brother scenario, you know? And I think someone just put the big L word in here, which is leadership. I mean, this is the leaders of today and the future leaders of tomorrow. You know, we need to get them match fit to lead and to understand languishing for themselves and in their teams and be able to have these conversations. Otherwise, people, as you said, they're just sitting there, they've checked out, they've unplugged, and I'm not talking in a good way, and they're really sad. They're not, you know, this is not a happy way to live.
Yeah.
I am going to chuck to the floor now to ask you, are you up for answering some questions, Corey, from people in the webinar?
I will certainly try my best, and I will be honest when I'm pulling it out.
If not, you can show us your watercolor.
backpack.
I'm dying to know about the watercolor therapy. So, okay, have we got some questions? It looks like we've got some themes, but don't be shy. It would be really, really great to hear from you. One, can you define languishing? Great question. And I should have asked it at the very beginning. So, Zach, brilliant. Thank you.
Well, people use a lot of descriptors, but there is a diagnosis. And the way to think of languishing is it's when you do not meet the criteria for flourishing. So let's start where we want more people to be, which is mental health.
Yeah.
To flourish, you have to have at least one of the three questions about emotional well-being every day or almost every day in the past month. That's either happy, satisfied, or interested in life. You only need one almost every day in the past month.
So happy,
feeling good.
So happy, satisfied.
You could be satisfied, or you could be interested in life. Now there's three different, right? And let's not talk about why I chose those, but they get at slightly different things. You don't have to be happy or satisfied to meet the criteria for flourishing. All you have to do is be interested in life most of the time.
Yeah.
But then you have to meet the criteria for at least 6 out of the 11 qualities of functioning well. There's 5 qualities of social well-being: a sense of contribution. There's a sense of also belonging, which I call integration. There's a sense of coherence, which is you can make sense of what's going on in the world around you. So those are 3 qualities of social well-being. And then there's 6 qualities of psychological well-being. Do you like most parts of your personality? Are you being challenged to grow and become a better person? Does your life have direction and meaning? Are you confident to think and express your ideas and opinions? Those are 4 out of the 6 psychological well-being. It can be any of the 11. Some social, some psychological. For some people, it could be all 6 of the psychological well-being. But you have to have at least 6 or more of the functioning well almost every day.
Wow.
Or every day. So think about it. You only have to have 7 out of the 14 qualities in my questionnaire almost every day to meet the criteria for mental health. Now, I'm emphasizing that because people flourish in so many different ways. They have so many different combinations of things they can prioritize in their life or they could ask for at work.
And it's different for different people, right?
Of course. Yeah. But I love that the thing is, I'm not asking you to be perfect in 14 qualities. Just 7. It's amazing. 7. It's a tipping point. 7 out of 14. If you do not meet the criteria for almost every day, you're languishing to some degree. Some people are languishing mildly. That means they feel some of these good qualities and emotions a couple times a week.
Right.
But not almost every day. And then some people are languishing moderately, and then some are languishing severely. And severe languishing is you rarely, if ever, felt any of those 3 qualities of emotional well-being, and you rarely, if ever, saw yourself or felt like you were functioning with purpose, belonging, and all those other good qualities.
Yeah, okay.
So what is languishing is the absence of the very things that makes your life meaningful and worth living.
Wow.
It's the absence of things like belonging, purpose, contribution, a sense of autonomy, and a sense of personal growth, a sense of self-acceptance, a sense of coherence that the world doesn't make any goddamn sense to you. You don't have warm, trusting relationships. You're right. I mean, you have the absence of those kinds of things. Just think about it for a moment. That's
Yeah.
another form of suffering.
Huge, huge.
And we've been completely ignoring it.
Well,
Completely ignoring it because if it's
um,
not mental illness, it's not a problem. And my work shows that just because you're free of mental illness doesn't mean you're anywhere close to flourishing. A lot of people are languishing.
yeah,
And I really want to get rid of this notion that as much as I love Adam and what he wrote in that op-ed, people seem to think that languishing it was a mood. It's not a mood. It
no,
wasn't a temporary point in our lives. It was pervasive before the pandemic. It went up enormously during the pandemic, and it's still with us, and it's not going away if we don't start paying attention to it.
no, I hear you. And I think what's amazing in the chat is, so if I look at a lot of it is, how do we solve, right? So people who are languishing but feel stuck because the job market's so tough, says one person. And the very important part that when you're languishing also, your confidence cannot be at an all-time high. You're not showing up in the world the way that you hoped you would. So it's almost like that cycle, that vicious cycle. So that one, Kim has asked about that. We've got something from Simone, which was great, around leaders investing in deep conversations with their people about their values and purpose as part of talent development discussions. Not just once, that annual performance review. Oh my God. I mean, how outdated and ridiculous is that? I think there's a lot more that we could be doing to create structured, not disingenuous, but authentically structured conversations that are safe at work. And I think that is very much part of leadership. So a lot of the work that we do at BWelco is training leaders to have those conversations and to also then almost have a personalized sort of well-being strategy for their teams or their organizations. But again, if you find that, say, 20% of your team are languishing, and you've had those conversations and you've got to the point where there's enough trust for that transparency, there are things that you can do. There are things that you can implement and suggest. It's not just, well, you have to live like this forever, is it, Corey? You can do things. Like
Well, here's the way and why I wrote the second half of my book around the 5 vitamins. These are 5 activities that research has shown that people who are languishing or depressed if they do more of, they begin to move out of those 2 places and slowly towards flourishing. Now, the reason I talked about the 5 vitamins is I've learned very early in my life that I can't wait for the world to change to give me what I need. It does need to change. Don't get me wrong. I'm a sociologist. I want changes at work. I want changes in the way in school and uni and all these other places. But I'm not going to wait for them because I can do those 5 things.
Yeah. Well,
for myself and for the people I love and with the people I love and with my colleagues and encourage them to do those 5 vitamins.
Yeah.
Before healthcare and public health and the workplace catch up. I'm not saying it's enough. I'm not saying it's the only answer, but I'm not going to wait for the system to change in order to get the things I need. And I don't want you to wait either, because those 5 activities that go out and help somebody or get involved in a cause and devote some time.
There was a great question about, has there been a study done around the, if you do volunteering, does that kind of improve your quality of life? And yes, the answer is yes. I think one of the other things that's really important, we did a really piece of fantastic work with Beyond Blue, and there's a report you can find on the website, which does have evidence-based activities that have been proven to help, a bit like your 5 vitamins. And one of the things that I've sort of said, if there's one thing I would love, it's that well-being became a verb. I keep saying, I know it's a bit like John Mayer, love is a verb, but that sense that you have your own agency, that you can't wait for it to change. A lot of the people that we filmed said some of them had gone to a workshop, great, but others had just sat there and looked at their life now versus the things that they used to do and find joy in, and decided just to do those things again, make the time to do them again. We have a lot of exercises and things that we do with groups to try to tap into some of the things that, because it is quite personal. You know, you love watercoloring, I'm presuming, or not, but you're experimenting creatively. You know, others play drums, other like nature, others. But the point is, you've got to have that moment of self-reflection, and you've got to tap into the stuff that if it's not giving you joy but used to, or the things that you can kind of start to practice, and that it is a life skill. I keep saying this too. I've got two daughters who are in the pandemic. I think one is definitely languishing and feels like there's no point. And I've said to her, you know, you're in the prime of your life. I know it sucked, but at the end of the day, is this really how you want to live? You're 22, you know, you've got everything ahead of you. So what do you love? And, you know, she finds it really hard. She's like, I don't know, Mum. I don't know what I love. So, you know, we're trying each week to find something. And it's a bit hit and miss, but you've got to make you've got to have that moment where you reflect and you find those things. And we've got to somehow have workplaces that, yes, I know a yoga session is great. Well, not for me. I'm not that bendy. But, you know, I think there are workplaces trying to implement things. What we don't know is how. I mean, considering the stats and the data that you've got on the workplace in the US and that we've kind of are beginning to understand here, it's very hit and miss, isn't it?
Yes, and it looks like somebody posted the PDF of the 5 vitamins, because you can begin to think about these things and doing some of those things. Now, you don't have to do all 5 in one day. That wasn't the point of the study. But people who chose one of them the day before, it was every week they were interviewed on a Monday.
Okay.
And they were asked what they had done it was Tuesday. It was a Tuesday in the life of flourishers. And they were asked what they had done on the previous day. They reconstructed their day. Now, if they had done more of one of those activities, they were much more likely to have a better day. Now, a better day was operationalized, and we can talk about it. But even if you were depressed or languishing, if you chose one of those vitamins on that Monday, did a little more of it, you had a better day. And if you kept doing one of those 5 vitamins on a regular basis, a little more of it, not only did you have a better day, your mental health began to improve. And as your mental health began to improve, you became less reactive emotionally and more observant, in almost like in the qualities of mindfulness.
Yeah, wonderful.
And it began to encourage you to do more of those 5 things.
So
now, some of those things can be done at work, and some of those can be done at home. But my point is, this isn't the answer to everything, but it's something we can all begin to do at school, at work, at home, with each other, for each other.
Yeah. And you've just used the key word, do. You know, I don't.
This is not something you sit and just for 5 minutes and say, let's just de-stress. You've got to do something in order to get more of these qualities of flourishing in your life. They don't come just by thinking.
Yeah.
They come by re-engaging in life in the world. And it's not easy. I write about how hard I had it when I was coming out of depression and my suicide attempt.
Yeah. Okay.
I've been to those bottoms. I know it. And it takes small steps. And I write about those small steps and how my ego kept screaming back at, oh my God, 5 minutes of play isn't going to do shit. And guess what? My therapist pushed back and I won.
Yeah.
I got my life back. But was it hard. And I know that personally.
Yeah.
But we can start there. And then we have to start asking for our government to stop taking our well-being from us as if it's something they can use without investing in us.
Yeah.
That's our life.
Yeah.
That's our lifeblood we're giving away.
And I think too, particularly for people, you know, of my age who have got children at home, probably they're never going to leave home. And we've also got aging parents. You know, we call ourselves the sandwich generation. There is so much burnout. And, you know, interesting, I was reading something this morning about how Australia, of all places, you know, this incredible, natural, wild, wonderful country, has one of the highest rates of burnout in the world. And it just seems to be something that, you know, despite the beaches and the beautiful kind of natural world that we have here, you know, people are obviously feeling extremely overwhelmed, and like the balance is kind of not there. So look, I think the main thing now, because we're going to wrap up soon, is, oh, someone wants to hear you talk more. Do you really want to hear Corey talk more about governments taking well-being from us? Because I know Corey could talk a lot about that. But if there were 5 key things that businesses can do, I know this is kind of on the fly, Corey. You can visit our website if you want to, and we have a lot of solutions to this. But Corey, from your perspective, what are the 5 things that businesses could do right now?
One, and I read about this, is for many people, when they were young, they were inspired to work very hard and suffer and sacrifice to get educated, to begin a career in a specific domain, because there were values. They had values that they wanted to live by. And it's very clear to me, even in our healthcare workers, doctors and nurses in the United States are being demoralized. They're not burned out. What looks like burnout is really demoralization. They're not able to live the principles and values that inspired them to become doctors and nurses, because the system in healthcare prioritizes things that prevent them from doing the things they need to do for their patients. Usually it's bottom line stuff that gets in doctors connecting with their patients, right? And young doctors are writing about this. If people can't live the values and principles that inspired them to take up a career, you will create a lot of languishing because of demoralization.
Yep.
So a workplace needs to understand, well, what are the things that you believe in when you're doing your work? What are you inspired?
Yes.
What inspires you to keep doing these things for people?
Because there's nothing worse than having to be in an environment where you are living, you know, incongruent to those. You know, it's like a spiritual, soul-crushing, awful state to be in when you're having to do something that is not aligned to your values. So that's values, I think, really, that's a really good start. And we do help people tap into that.
The second one is closely related to it. And a lot more workplaces are asking people to do things that are unethical. And it's called moral injury.
Right.
And the lower you are on the socioeconomic hierarchy, the more you're asked to do other people's unethical, dirty work. There's even a book about it. And it's a remarkable thing. I just picked up a paper. Of course, it happens in the armed forces. There was a study that came out of Canada where the more moral injury, the more likely they were to be languishing.
Yeah.
And this isn't just happening in our armed forces in every country. It's happening on the front lines of most workplaces. People are asked to cut corners and do things that are unethical. That can and should stop. We can't live amoral, unethical lives and flourish. No. Unless you're Hell's Angels, which is I write about in the book, which is an irony.
Yeah, but again, you know, I think that's, well, we can have a whole other conversation about, I've just been listening to a podcast with Jelly Roll, you know, the guy who was in prison, and, you know, he now spends all of his time, apart from obviously he's a musician, but going back to those prisons, because he was a dealer and he was also, you know, a fentanyl addict. And so, you know, it's not like, and I know we've done some work, and Matt's done some work in corrective services, and it's not all hopeless, you know, but if you don't have that sense of, as you say, values alignment, connection, where there's an honor code, like a real honor code, like, you know, you do what's right, not what's easy. That's super tough. Some of
the other recommendations I would take from the questions that go into the measurement of flourishing and languishing. In some workplaces, you may never find an occupation where the things you do contribute worth and value, not because you don't believe in it, but because others don't acknowledge it as valuable. Yeah. And if you can't find a place that acknowledges what you do as something that matters to the whole team, then I would call that a toxic place and get the hell out
Yeah.
if you can afford it.
Yeah.
But there's no reason that a workplace cannot actually address some of these things, because I think a lot of the feeling that we're not contributing anything of worth and value comes from the fact that we never spend time to genuinely acknowledge someone's contribution.
Yeah.
And
Well,
we don't
and
say
so
thank you. Thank you is a really powerful thing for leaders and managers to say. I really appreciate what you do for me.
yeah. And that's
Appreciation is
appreciation.
a lost art in the workplace,
Well,
and
and,
that could
and
be
that and that
reclaimed.
comes back to your thing about what I'm basically saying is you made a difference and you matter. You know,
Yeah.
and that's what's super important. Someone put much further up in the chat that for the first time they were acknowledged and they actually burst into tears because it hasn't happened before, you know, and that's kind of shocking. We have got a question here about 5 things a parent should do for a languishing teenager.
Mhm.
So if you would like to take that, I think that would be really helpful because obviously we're at work, but we're also at home.
Well, I can't out of memory cite all. There's several studies that I focus on in the book about the qualities that need to be cultivated in a parental relationship with kids. And the reason I focused on those studies rather than media, because I think right now we're seeing a lot of low-lying fruit as if somehow if we get kids to stop using social media, that somehow they'll all flourish. We can take away something that's negative. That doesn't mean they're all going to flourish, because what these studies showed was over 80% of youth will be flourishing when they have quality relationships, when they feel that an adult in their life listens to them, uses what they've heard from them to make decisions about their lives, where there's warmth and trust, where
Yeah.
there's a sense of safety and belonging, and a variety of other qualities of relationships. And I was amazed at how much those qualities of the kinds of connections kids have with adults matter. When
Oh,
86% of kids who have all 5 of those qualities are flourishing, it suggests to me we
that,
could solve a lot of languishing in our kids if we sort of prioritize some of those 5 things. Now, I can't cite them off the top of my head, but
no,
I can
but we
send you
can,
this study, and it's in the book as well, because I want us to focus on relationships, not just demonizing media as the solution to the problem of languishing. That's one of the problems.
yeah, yeah.
But if
But
we
it's
all
not
need
the
to be
whole problem.
present for each other. No,
Yeah.
it's not.
And
And
I think, yeah. Well, look, this is, I mean, I think everyone can agree we could just do this forever for those, because this topic is just it's so important and it's so relevant. And, you know, I feel like we're in new territory when in fact it's been with us all along. We have got so many thank yous to you, Corey, in this, which is so beautiful to read. We have got some books to give away. Woo! So what we would really like to do is just encourage you guys to register. If you've had an experience with languishing, then it would be fantastic. So we've got a question for you. If you had to think of yourself or a loved one who has languished or is languishing, what does it feel like in 1 sentence? Really, really interested to know. And it'll have to be first in best dress because I think we've got 20 or something. But the other question that's come up is the title of the book on moral and ethical values, I think it was, that you mentioned, Corey. Do you remember the book? Have we got it?
yes. Well, the title of the concept is moral injury, but there's a book, and forgive me, when I read too much and I get the title of the book,
Because
I
what we'll
think
do,
it's ethical or moral dirty work, but I will look it up and send it to our colleagues at Be Well, and we'll see,
and then we
we'll
can,
see if
yeah.
we can, yeah.
Well, I can't wait to see what the next study is. I can't wait to kind of have a bigger discussion. And it looks like everyone's really enjoyed it. So, you know, a lot of love for you. And I think everybody is feeling like it's been a really worthwhile experience. So thank you for taking the time taking the
Well,
time.
of course. I'm sorry about the microphone at the beginning. I wish
No, we got there. We got
we
there.
got there.
Okay,
And it
well,
was great
have a
to be
great
with
rest of the
you.
day and a wonderful weekend and lots of love.